Hello, everyone. I am so glad you could join us again. What a blessing it is to spend time with you folks. Whether it be on the phone or passing by in the hallway, it's always a blessing to see you. It's always a blessing to hear of the exciting things that are happening in your life. Now, I know full well that you say, how can things be exciting? Well, with the parade that you had over the weekend and the activities that you're able to participate in online, the phone calls, our time together here in our chapel service, we do our best to provide different opportunities for you. Thank you for everyone, for your well-wishing, for your prayers, for all of our staff. We are praying for you as well. So thank you for joining with me today. I would like to begin our time together with our corporate prayer. This is a prayer that is provided across all Westminster communities, and it is a common prayer that all communities share on Tuesday afternoons. So I would like for us to just, for a moment, to bow our heads as I share this prayer with you. God of compassion, we turn to you on behalf of all who cry out to you day and night, yet hear only silence, who search for your presence with them, but have felt nothing, who come to you in their pain or suffering, grief or loss, yet still long for your healing touch. In your holiness, you have blessed the faithful for centuries. You have been with us too, since our births, granting us fullness of life. Each day we witness the miracles of nature, of the rising and setting sun, the flowers beginning to bloom, the freshness of a new rain. In the faces of our neighbors, caregivers, and loved ones, we find friendship and nurture. In our communities, you bless us with resources to share. Yet, especially in this time of pandemic, many of us still need deliverance. Many of us feel surrounded by monsters or forces too fierce to conquer alone. Many of us fear that our bodies will melt or our souls will shrivel up if we do not sense your presence. We weep with those who weep because of hungers, spiritual or physical, because of pain too strong to bear, because of grief that threatens to overcome, because we work to a point of exhaustion. God, who knows our deepest needs, as you have saved your people in the past, deliver us. Grant us the strength that comes from crying out to you, the hope that even when we cannot sense you, your healing love is at work. Help us to see the beauty that is around us, and give us voices to sing your praise once again, that all may know of your abundant mercy. Amen. This prayer was provided by Chaplain Holly Wildhack. She is the chaplain of Westminster Manor in Bradenton. So we thank her for sharing this prayer with us. Now today we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3. It is a long chapter, but it's going to be a great time of sharing together. And I pray that you will follow along with me as we read this passage. And it's an interesting story, and it will bring back a lot of childhood memories, I am certain. Follow along. It'll come up on your screen. It will be in the New Living Translation. And so I realize that that is not a translation that you may all be familiar with, but follow along in your own Bible if you like. This is a powerful passage, and I think that it will really give us some hope for today. Let's read together. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue that he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald went out. People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue that I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have raised up." Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, or advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. May God add his blessings to the reading of his word. You know, when I was growing up, I loved Bible stories that I heard as a child. Those old familiar songs, flannel graphs, remember those? Those pieces of cut-out paper illustrations of people and animals and buildings that would stick to the flannel board. Now that I'm older, I am rediscovering timeless truths in the simple accounts of faith. Those accounts give us hope, don't they? Gives us hope and courage as we face our days today. Fire is a scary thing, and left unchecked, it brings destruction and devastation. We all face fires from day to day. How we deal with them and how we face them sets the pace for our walk with God. In the fire, in this account, the fire is the central figure of the story, isn't it? But the faith of those who faced it is the theme. So I'd like for us to consider for a few moments what this passage teaches us and what we can learn, how we can use it to govern our lives. First of all, God gives us the ability to see the reality of the approaching fire. Now the king had a golden statue erected, and the king ordered that the statue be worshipped. Not to do so, we read, meant death. Now, there's something to keep in mind here, that idols are not erected overnight. Statues are not erected overnight. It took time. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saw the building taking place. They knew the decree. They knew the consequence. All the while that this statue was being constructed. We can often see conflict and trials approaching, can't we? Don't we have that sense in the back of our mind that, I know how this is going to turn out. I can see what's coming. We can anticipate it. We can fear it. We certainly can't change it. But how are we going to look at it? What are we going to do about it? What's our reaction? Where will we place our trust? What is the decision now that we intend to make before the conflict and the trial comes to the forefront in our life? We think about it, don't we? We plan. We even have those conversations within a conversation. We argue with ourselves. We talk things out. Have you ever done that? You have a conversation with yourself about a situation, and you think you know what's going to be said, and so you try to anticipate that, and you formulate your answers even in advance of what is coming your way. Now, secondly of all, God gives the courage to step into the fire. Now these three men were thrown into the fire, we find, though they would have gladly stepped in, I believe, of their own accord. We find no reference to any type of resistance. We find no statements of defiance. We did find their statement earlier in the passage where they said, even if you give us another chance, we will not worship an idol. Sometimes, folks, we need to be willing to step into the fire for the glory of God. It is a test of our faith, and it is a testimony of our lives. It would be foolish for me to share with you today that none of us have ever had our faith tested. None of us have ever had our testimony put to the test. All of us have. What have been the decisions that we have made in the past? Are we willing to step up and step out for what is right and pure and holy and true? How do we live our lives, and how does our faith get lived out in the public eye? Thirdly, God gives the grace to endure the fire. These three men were in the fire, not just close, but surrounded and engulfed in that fire. When we feel overwhelmed, when we feel surrounded by the flames, God help us to stand firm in our faith. Oh God, move upon us. Give us the courage that we need. Each of us would probably say, if I was placed in that situation, I don't know what I would do. You do know what you would do at the moment, but it's hard to plan, isn't it? Faith comes to the forefront in the midst of our struggles, even when we are thinking that we are inadequate or incapable. Next, we find that God gives us a complete deliverance from this fire. These three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, stepped out of the fire. Notice that they went in bound. How could they have stepped out of that flaming furnace if they had been completely bound? I submit to you something. I submit to you that the ropes were the only thing that burned in that fire. Everything that had them bound, I believe, was burned away. And they stepped out, free men, in more ways than one. We too will be able to step out of the fire, unbound, unhurt, and not even the smell of smoke. I can't imagine even getting close to a fire and not coming away smelling like smoke. Remember campfires? Remember the pot-bellied stove? Anytime you opened that up, anytime that you handled the wood, anytime you carried out the ashes, anything that you did pertaining to that fire, it left an odor, didn't it? You would come in from a campfire and you would smell of smoke. If you ever played with fire when you were a child, mother's nose, father's nose were always sensitive enough to say, why do you smell like smoke? But these men were completely delivered. And so can we be completely delivered. All that has us bound can be burned away. And God calls us forth to step up and to step out. Lastly, God's presence goes with us, no matter the fire. Now, here is a fascinating thing about this story. God's presence, we are told, was seen in the fire. But notice that God's presence was not seen until they were in the fire. When Nebuchadnezzar and his men went to the furnace to throw in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't have a confession then that there was already someone in the flames. No, God's presence was not seen until they were in the midst of the fire. The guards didn't recognize the fourth man when they looked in later. It does not mean that he was absent until the fire. Yet the one that noticed, the one that had the most blatant disregard for God, was the one who looked in and saw the fourth person in the fire. You see, God promises his presence to be with us always. Always. I can stand here and I can tell you with assurance that because of what the Bible tells us, we know that there's not a place that we can go that God is not there. So I submit to you that God was already in the flames before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went in. God's promise to be with us always, though he may not be seen, I give you assurance that he is always there. In the midst of our heartache, in the midst of our pain, our illness, our frustrations, God is there. And he's not only here with us, he is with our loved ones, our families, our friends. God's presence permeates the earth. Do we have the faith to see his presence? Do we have the trust of being able to hold on to him even when we're going through the fire? Now, some would say that that fire was really not all that bad. Maybe it was just a few glowing embers. Notice that the guards who threw them in died from the power of the flames. We face fires that would destroy those of lesser faith. Those without God would be consumed by the life's flames and torments all in their own right. They would be consumed. We must keep in mind that through it all, God was there. Through it all, God's presence was with them. God's presence saw them through. And in the same way today, in the flames of our life, God is with us as well. Amen. I'd like to close with our Westminster prayer. Bow your heads with me. Creator God, we ask you to bless our Westminster community and all who live and work within it. May this place be filled with deep caring, welcoming hospitality, and dedicated respect. May all who visit here be greeted with warmth and kindness. May all who live here be graced with God and peace. May all who serve here do so in the Spirit of Jesus, whose deep love and dedication to healing touched all he encountered. Amen. God bless you. May God use you in a wonderful way to touch those lives around you. Amen.